Before Alice Waters, most chefs in America weren't asking where their ingredients came from. They were asking how to fix them. Because for a long time, the system looked like this: distributors, importers, frozen products, and out of season produce. And chefs were trained to compensate: more butter, more sauce, more technique. Then Alice Waters opened a small restaurant in Berkeley and quietly flipped the entire idea upside down. Instead of asking, "How do I make this taste better?" she asked something much simpler: "What if we just started with something that already does?" And that question changed everything.
Does the legacy hold up? We chef.
Most chefs build their reputation on technique. Alice Waters built hers on restraint. Because Chez Panisse wasn't about invention. It wasn't about spectacle. It wasn't even really about the chef. It was about the ingredients. Seasonal, local, and sourced with intention. And that sounds normal now. But at the time, it wasn't. Before Alice Waters, the idea that a restaurant would change its menu every single day based on what's available felt almost impractical. After her, it became the standard. And whether you call it farm to table, California cuisine, or just good cooking, her influence is everywhere. This is the legacy of Alice Waters. Alice Waters was born in 1944 in New Jersey, and her early life didn't point directly towards becoming one of the most influential chefs in America. But there was one experience that mattered more than anything else. She studied abroad in France. And it's hard to overstate how different that world was. Because in France, food wasn't treated like a product. It was treated like culture. It was culture. Markets were local, meals were seasonal. Ingredients weren't something that needed fixing. They were something to be respected. They were built around what was grown nearby, what was in season, what was ready that week. You didn't expect strawberries in winter, you waited for them. And when they were harvested, they actually tasted like something. Meals weren't rushed, they were optimized. They weren't about convenience, they were about sitting down, taking time and letting the food speak for itself. Bread came from a bakery down the street. Cheese came from a specific region. Produce came from farmers you could actually talk to. There was a direct line between the land and the plate. And when she came back to the States, that contrast was sharp, because America in the 60s and 70s was heading in the opposite direction. More processed, more industrial, more convenience. Built for consistency, shelf life, and scale. Ingredients traveled thousands of miles, and the goal wasn't to highlight them, it was to make them usable. And she didn't ignore the difference, because once you've experienced food that is deeply connected to place, it's hard to accept food that isn't. And instead of adjusting back to the American system, Alice Waters decided to challenge it, and in doing so, she built her entire philosophy around it. In 1971, Alice Waters opened Chez Panisse in Berkeley, California. And at first, it wasn't the institution we think of today. It was loose, collaborative, almost chaotic. But there was one thing that was non-negotiable: the ingredients. Waters started working directly with local farmers, which at the time was unusual, because most restaurants relied on distributors. Consistency mattered more than quality. Availability mattered more than seasonality. But Chez Panisse flipped that. No tomatoes in winter that tasted like nothing. She waited until the peak of season in summer. No shortcuts, no compromises. If it wasn't good enough, it didn't go in the menu. Diners didn't show up expecting to find their favorite mainstay on the menu. There were no iconic dishes. Diners learned to expect whatever was available at that moment. And slowly, that philosophy started attracting attention. Not because it was flashy, but because it tasted different, cleaner, brighter, more alive.
I just did it because I had a passion to sort of make this thing right and to make it work and to get people to like what we were cooking for them. I was just intent on it. And because of that, I just never worried if I got paid or I had enough sleep or if I was living any kind of normal life. It just, nothing else mattered except finding food that these people in the dining room would love. And that was it.
To understand Alice Waters' impact, you have to understand what chefs were doing before her. because for a long time, ingredients weren't the priority. Technique was forced to determine the dish. Sauces carried all the flavor. Presentations were stacked so flavors blended together. If something wasn't perfect, you didn't discard it, you adjusted it, you supported it, you built around it. Chefs engineered around the imperfections in their products. Waters rejected that completely. She believed that if you started with great ingredients, you didn't need to do much at all. Which sounds obvious now, but at the time it was radical, because it shifted the power away from the kitchen and back to the farm. And once that happened, everything changed. Now chefs needed relationships with farmers. Now menus needed to adapt. Now seasonality wasn't a limitation, it was the point. And that's the foundation of what we now call farm to table. Chez Panisse didn't turn into a global restaurant empire. That's not what Alice Waters was building. But its influence spread anyways, through chefs, through farmers, through diners who started expecting something different, through imitation, because chefs started leaving the kitchen and opening their own restaurants. And they carried the same ideas with them: seasonal menus, local sourcing, relationships with farmers. And at the same time, diners started expecting something different, menus that changed, ingredients that actually tasted like something, food that felt connected to a place instead of disconnected from it. And once that expectation set in, it doesn't really go away. The restaurant would eventually expand into both a cafe and a more formal dining room, each built around the same core idea: let the ingredients lead. And beyond the restaurant, Waters pushed the philosophy even further, through initiatives like the Edible Schoolyard, bringing this way of thinking into education. Because for her, this was never just about restaurants. It was about changing how people think about food entirely. Seasonal stopped being a limitation and started becoming a selling point. Locality was no longer something that intimidated chefs, it was celebrated. And the idea that a chef should know where their food comes from went from unusual to expected. And like any philosophy that becomes this influential, it didn't come without criticism. Because farm to table sounds ideal, but it can also be expensive, it can be exclusive, and not every region has access to the same level of ingredients. Some critics argued that this style of dining helped push restaurants toward a more kind of quiet luxury, where simplicity became its own form of status. Others point out that while the philosophy is admirable, it's not always scalable. Not every restaurant can build direct relationships with farmers. Not every guest can afford to pay for that system. And those are fair criticisms. Because once food becomes this intentional, it also becomes harder to make accessible for everyone. And that tension wasn't lost on Alice Waters. Because while her restaurant helped define the philosophy at the highest level, she also spent decades trying to bring it back down to earth.
She's become a target.
People say Alice Waters is self-righteous and elitist.
I feel that good food should be a right and not a privilege. And it needs to be without pesticides and herbicides, and everybody deserves this food. That's not elitist.
That's where Edible Schoolyard project comes in, a project that was not built for fine dining, but built for public schools. The idea was simple: if access is the problem, start earlier. Teach kids how to grow their own food. Let them harvest it, cook with it, eat it together, not as a luxury, but as a baseline. Because Waters believed that understanding ingredients shouldn't start in a restaurant, it should start in the classroom, in a garden. So instead of scaling the restaurant model, she tried to scale the mindset, making the same values, seasonality, quality, connection to food, something that wasn't reserved for those who could afford it, but something that was learned, practiced, and carried forward. Alice Waters' influence isn't just measured in restaurants, it's measured in people. Because Chez Panisse became one of the most important training grounds in American cooking. Chefs, bakers, and food thinkers passed through that kitchen, and carried her philosophy into entirely different corners of the industry. Her chef tree consists of 3 notable individuals. One of the most notable is Jeremiah Towers, who helped shape early identity of Chez Panisse, and later became a defining figure himself in California cuisine. Then there's Paul Bertoli, who went on to influence both restaurant cooking and artisanal food production. You've also got Mark Peel, a Chez Panisse alum who co-founded Campanile in LA, helping spread Waters' philosophy to LA dining culture. And beyond individual chefs that came through her kitchen, there's an entire generation of chefs who adopted her approach, like Chefs Dan Barber, Susan Goins, and even Thomas Keller, all adopted an ingredient-driven approach. Seasonal menus, local sourcing, ingredient-first cooking. Not because it was trendy, but because it worked. The food was better for it. Simpler food translated into fine dining seamlessly. After the concept of farm-to-table stuck, we then see terroir-driven cuisine gain popularity. Chefs focusing on a specific region and showcasing what fine dining can look like there. And then there's her writings, most notably The Art of Simple Food, which reinforces the same idea she built her entire career on. If you start with great ingredients, you don't need to do much else. Because unlike chefs who built their legacy on technique, Alice Waters built hers on taste. So what is Alice Waters' legacy? It's not just Chez Panisse. It's not just farm to table. It's that she fundamentally changed what chefs value. Before her, great cooking meant control. After her, it meant restraint. Before her, chefs transformed ingredients. After her, they protected them. And that shift is still shaping restaurants today. Because once you teach chefs to start with better ingredients, you can't really go back. And of all the chefs we've covered, and will continue to cover, it's quite possible that no one individual chef changed the landscape of cooking in America more than Alice Waters. Because she didn't just change fine dining, she changed how we think about food. But if Waters reshaped how chefs think about ingredients, the next chef helped reshape how cuisine itself moved across the world. Because before food became local again, it had to become global. And no one did that more to carry French cuisine from regional roots to the world stage than Paul Bocuse.
This is Chef's Legacies. If you enjoyed this video or any of our other videos, please give us a follow and subscribe for more stories behind the world's most influential chefs.